The year was 1972, Las Vegas Hilton. 20,000 fans screamed as Elvis lit up the stage in his rhinestone jumpsuit. But when the doors opened and Priscilla walked in, not alone, but with another man, Elvis saw her. And for the first time, he stopped cold. What happened next froze the entire arena. Las Vegas Hilton, August 1972. The air shimmered with smoke, perfume, and the faint buzz of neon. Inside the international showroom, every seat was filled. More than 20,000 fans pressed forward, holding ticket stubs, scarves, and cameras. Elvis Presley walked on stage in his white jumpsuit. Rhinestones flashed like stars under the spotlights. The orchestra struck its opening chords, and the crowd rose to its feet. Their roar was deafening, a wave of sound that shook the walls. From the balcony to the back row, people shouted his name. Some cried. Others simply froze, stunned to see the king of rock and roll so close. Every eye followed his every move. Every gesture felt larger than life. Elvis bowed slightly, picked up the wired microphone, and smiled. He looked powerful yet tender, a man who carried both triumph and pain in the same breath. That night, the stage belonged to him. The Hilton had become his kingdom. Waiters slipped through aisles with champagne, security lined the edges of the hall, and the air conditioners hummed against the desert heat. The show had barely begun, but already it felt like history. He started with, "That's all right." The crowd clapped in rhythm, voices joining in. Flashbulbs went off like sparks, capturing his silhouette against the velvet backdrop. A few, fans in the front, stretched their hands toward him, begging for a touch, a scarf, a moment they could keep forever. To them, Elvis wasn't just a singer. He was a symbol of youth, of rebellion, of dreams too large for small towns. In that room, he was larger than life, yet somehow closer than ever. As the band shifted into "Love Me Tender," the mood softened. Couples leaned together, holding hands. Fans swayed gently. The spotlight narrowed, catching the lines of Elvis's face. Joy mixed with something deeper. He sang not just to the audience, but to someone unseen. For a brief moment, silence filled the hall except for his voice. It was a moment of awe when time itself seemed to pause. And then, the back doors opened. A flicker of light cut through the darkened hall. Few noticed at first. The crowd was too focused on the man on stage. But in the shadows of that doorway, history was quietly entering. No one yet knew how sharply the night would turn. Have you ever felt the weight of a moment shift before anyone else could see why? The orchestra swelled. Elvis launched into "Suspicious Minds," a song that had become both anthem and warning. The brass section blared, the drums snapped like a heartbeat, and the crowd moved with the rhythm. His voice carried power, filling every corner of the Hilton showroom. Then it happened. The back doors opened, letting in a rush of hallway light. At first, only those seated in the last rows turned their heads. Two figures stepped inside, shadowed against the glow. The ushers hesitated, uncertain whether to stop them. But then whispers rippled forward, like wind through tall grass. It was Priscilla Presley. She looked poised, elegant, her dark hair shining under the dim lights. Her white dress seemed to glow faintly in the haze of smoke. But she wasn't alone. On her arm was another man, Mike Stone, the karate instructor whose name had been floating through rumor and gossip. The crowd gasped. Some fans leaned forward, whispering sharply to their neighbors. Others fell silent, their cheers caught in their throats. The sound of the music continued, but it felt as if something else had entered the room. Something heavier than melody, sharper than brass. Elvis saw her. His eyes flicked toward the back of the hall. For a fraction of a second, his timing faltered. The microphone wavered in his hand, his voice sliding off the note before he pulled it back. The orchestra, trained for any mistake, carried on without missing a beat, but those closest to the stage saw the shift. He had frozen, not physically, but in spirit. 20,000 people continued to cheer, clap, and sway. Yet under it all, tension crackled. Word passed quickly. It's her. Priscilla's here. She brought someone. Each whisper travelled row by row until the knowledge reached the front. A woman in the third row pressed her hand to her mouth. A man in the balcony shook his head, muttering. The show had become more than a performance. It had turned into a silent duel of presence, played out in front of thousands. On stage, Elvis adjusted his stance. He sang louder, almost defiantly, but his eyes stayed fixed on the far end of the room. He could see her walking, each step measured, each gesture calm. She carried herself with dignity, but there was no mistaking the message. She wasn't alone. The man beside her leaned close, whispering something in her ear. She nodded faintly, her smile tight. Fans who noticed couldn't look away. It was as if the legend of Elvis Presley had collided with something unbearably human. Heartbreak, jealousy, the raw sting of love lost. Some wondered, what would he do? Would Elvis stop the song? Would he call her out in front of everyone? Or would he let the night collapse into chaos? The band thundered behind him. The horns screamed. Elvis gripped the microphone tighter, his knuckles white. He spun, threw his scarf into the crowd, but his smile was brittle. It was the smile of a man fighting to keep the mask intact. Near the doorway, ushers finally guided Priscilla and her companion toward reserved seats. Cameras flashed, trying to catch the scene. A few boos echoed from the back, swallowed quickly by nervous laughter. The entire arena felt the weight of the moment. Every fan knew this wasn't just a concert anymore. It was a collision between the man and the myth. Bootleggers recording. The show on hidden cassette players caught not just music that night, but gasps, murmurs, and the shifting current of a crowd caught between loyalty and curiosity. As Priscilla sat down, Elvis's voice cracked again, just for an instant. His face betrayed a flicker of pain before he swallowed it back and pushed forward. The king continued to sing, but those who were watching closely knew they were witnessing something rare. He wasn't just performing, he was bleeding. The moment would linger forever. Fans would tell it like a ghost story. The night Priscilla walked in with another man, and Elvis nearly broke on stage. And yet, this was only the beginning. The true test had not arrived, because every second the crowd waited for the impossible question to be answered. Would he fall apart, or would he rise? The Hilton showroom was no longer a theatre. It was an arena of tension. Elvis Presley stood at center stage, rhinestones sparkling, under the hot lights, yet his gaze never left the back rows. The band powered forward, horns sharp, guitars biting. To most, the music was still alive, but to those watching closely, the cracks were widening. Security men shifted near the aisles. They weren't sure if they should step in. Was this a disruption, or was it something far more personal? Their radios hissed, voices whispering instructions. None dared move too quickly. On stage, Elvis turned toward the orchestra pit. His hand tightened around the microphone stand. The veins in his neck strained as he pushed his voice harder, forcing strength where vulnerability wanted to break through. Caught in a trap, he sang, his tone carrying both anger and sorrow. The irony of the lyric wasn't lost on the audience. Some fans exchanged knowing glances. Others shook their heads, wishing they could shield him from what was unfolding. A young woman in the fifth row clutched her program so tightly that the paper tore. Beside her, a man whispered, "He sees her. He can't look away." The couple stared at the stage, feeling the tension in their own chests. The crowd had become a living organism, restless, whispering, waiting. One wave of emotion moved through 20,000 people. Cheers rose, then softened into uneasy silence. The Hilton, usually electric with joy, now hummed with uncertainty. Bootleg recorders picked up the change. You can still hear it on grainy tapes, the sound of applause slowing, voices murmuring, and the faint edge of discomfort cutting through the music. Elvis's band, the TCB crew, kept their heads down. James Burton on guitar played with mechanical precision, refusing to look up. Ronnie Tutt hammered the drums, trying to drown out the crack in the singer's voice. They knew better than to break formation, but Elvis wasn't hiding his turmoil. His face, visible on giant projection screens, betrayed it. Sweat rolled down his temple. His eyes, usually bright with fire, now flickered with shadows. He was a man torn between fury and restraint. The spotlight caught him as he paused, just a fraction too long, before stepping forward again. The crowd leaned in, expecting a collapse, but he pulled the line back just in time. The show teetered on a knife's edge. Priscilla sat calmly in her seat, posture straight, face unreadable. Mike Stone leaned closer, whispering something. She nodded faintly. The gesture was small, but Elvis saw it. His jaw clenched. A sudden jolt ran through the music. He threw his scarf into the front row, more violently than usual. Fans screamed, but the motion carried a sharp edge. Less generosity, more release. Then came the silence. For just a beat, the band stumbled, unsure if he was stopping. He recovered quickly, driving into the next verse. But the silence had been enough. The audience knew. They felt it in their bones. A man in the balcony muttered, "This ain't just a show anymore." His words echoed the thoughts of everyone present. The Hilton showroom, usually filled with glamour and glitter, had become a stage for heartbreak. Every note was a wound, every lyric a confession. Still, Elvis fought on. He paced across the stage, glaring into the shadows where Priscilla sat. His voice grew hoarse, but he refused to quit. The king would not surrender in front of his people, yet the stakes were rising. Each second stretched longer. Each lyric carried the risk of collapse. 20,000 fans waited to see if he would explode or endure. What happens when a man must choose between pride and performance? Between anger and love? The crowd's silence deepened. Glasses clinked. Someone coughed. The sound of his boots against the stage echoed louder than before. The Hilton was holding its breath. Security men at the edge of the stage exchanged glances, ready for anything. They had seen Elvis lose his temper before. They had seen him storm off. But tonight was different. Tonight was personal. The final chorus neared. His voice broke again. He forced the last words out, gripping the mic so hard the cable shook. The orchestra reached its crescendo. The audience cheered, but it was thin, nervous, uncertain, and then silence. The song ended, but the applause was hesitant. People clapped, shouted his name, but their energy was fractured. They were no longer just fans. They were witnesses to something raw, something too intimate for public view. Elvis turned, staring into the crowd. His chest heaved. His face glistened. For a heartbeat, it looked as though he might walk off the stage. The Hilton held its breath. Would he leave them? Would the king abandon his throne mid-show? The stakes had never been higher. The Hilton showroom sat in uneasy silence. The last chord of Suspicious Minds still hung in the air, trembling like smoke. Elvis stood motionless at center stage, chest rising and falling, microphone lowered at his side. The crowd expected him to leap into the next song, as he always did, but nothing came. For the first time that night, the music stopped. The band looked to each other, unsure. James Burton's hand hovered over his guitar. Ronnie Tutt tapped his sticks lightly, waiting for a signal. But Elvis gave none. He simply stared out toward the back rows where Priscilla sat with another man. The hush spread like fire. 20,000 people leaned forward, straining to catch what he might do. The room was no longer loud with excitement. It was heavy with dread. Elvis raised the microphone halfway, then lowered it again. His lips trembled. He swallowed hard, his throat visible under the bright spotlight. The king was breaking, and no one could move. Finally, he whispered into the mic, "Well, I'll be damned." The words cut through the silence like glass. No music, no laughter, just his low voice echoing across the hall. Some fans gasped, others shifted uncomfortably in their seats. A woman in the balcony clutched her scarf as if it was sacred. For a moment, anger flashed across his face. His jaw clenched. His nostrils flared. He could have exploded right there. He could have ended the show, thrown the microphone, and walked away. But instead, he smiled. It wasn't wide or joyful. It was small, almost broken. Yet in that faint smile, there was a choice. He took a slow step forward. The spotlight followed. "Life surprises you," he said softly. "But the music goes on." The crowd erupted into nervous applause, but he raised his hand gently, quieting them. He wasn't ready to rush back into the show. He wanted them to feel it, to sit in the silence with him. He closed his eyes. The orchestra waited. The hall seemed to shrink. Every sound magnified. A cough, a glass set down, the faint buzz of an amplifier. And then, with a calm nod, he lifted the microphone again. The band picked up a soft, trembling chord. Not the pounding rhythm of rock and roll, but something gentler, fragile. Elvis's voice returned, lower, slower, aching. Each note carried the weight of his heart. The crowd listened in reverent stillness. Even the waiters stopped moving. You could hear a pin drop, except for his voice. Short bursts now. He lowered the mic. Silence. A cough in the rafters. The king was human, and with each line, the tension melted into compassion. The crowd no longer demanded perfection. They wanted to hold him up. They wanted him to survive this moment. What would you have done in his place? Would you have chosen fury or grace? As the final note rang out, he stood still again. The audience rose slowly to their feet, clapping, but gently this time. Not with wild frenzy, but with respect. They had just witnessed something few would ever forget. The king had frozen, and in that freeze, he had shown his soul. But the night was far from over. The applause that followed his whispered words wasn't wild. It was tender. A standing ovation, yes, but different. Fans weren't cheering the superstar. They were lifting up the man. Elvis let the sound wash over him, then raised his hand again. The hall fell quiet in an instant. He looked down at the stage floor, then back at the microphone in his hand. "Sometimes," he said slowly, "life throws you something you didn't expect. But we still sing." His voice cracked on the last word. The crowd answered with gentle applause, urging him forward. Even those who hadn't noticed Priscilla's entrance could feel the weight pressing on him. The orchestra shifted, preparing the next number. But Elvis stopped them with a small gesture. "Soft," he told them. "Keep it soft." The first chords rose like a whisper, a slow ballad, fragile in tone. Elvis closed his eyes and began to sing. His voice was lower now, more vulnerable. Each lyric stretched long, as though he were clinging to it, refusing to let go. It wasn't the fire of rock and roll. It was confession. People in the audience leaned forward, tears glistening in their eyes. They weren't just fans anymore. They were witnesses to a soul opening on stage. From her seat, Priscilla sat still, her hands folded in her lap. She didn't move, didn't smile, didn't frown. Yet even she seemed to falter under the weight of his voice. Mike Stone looked down, clearly uncomfortable with the attention pressing on them. Elvis kept singing. Each word, each breath was stripped bare. By the second verse, a hush had fallen so deep that you could hear the faint hum of the stage lights. And then something unexpected happened. The audience began to join him. It started with a handful of voices, soft and tentative. A few fans in the front rows sang along, almost whispering. Then others followed, their voices blending with his. By the final chorus, the Hilton showroom had become a choir. Elvis lowered his microphone slightly, listening. His lips trembled into a smile, not the brittle smile from earlier, but a real one. He stepped back, letting them carry the line. Thousands of voices filled the air, raw and imperfect, but united. The king had given them the stage, and in return, they gave him strength. The transformation was complete. This was no longer a concert about one man performing for his fans. It was a communion, a shared act of compassion. The crowd had carried him through heartbreak, reminding him that he wasn't alone. When the final note faded, Elvis bowed his head. He stood still for several long seconds, his hand pressed against his chest. The audience roared again, louder this time, but it was different from before. Not frenzy, not hysteria, it was love. Somewhere in the back, a woman whispered, "I'll never forget this night." Bootleg recordings captured the moment, though the tapes crackled and hissed. On them, you can hear the shift. From Elvis alone to Elvis and his people, singing as one. Have you ever seen strength in someone's weakness? Have you ever been moved more by imperfection than by glory? Elvis looked out across the sea of faces, tears shining in his eyes. For the first time all night, the tension was gone. The Hilton showroom felt lighter, as though a storm had finally broken. He lifted the mic one more time. "Thank you," he said simply. His voice was soft, but it carried. The king had turned heartbreak into humanity. But this night would not fade with the final bow. Its echo was only beginning. In the days after the Hilton performance, the whispers spread faster than any newspaper could print. Fans left the showroom that night knowing they had witnessed something different, something that couldn't be repeated. They told the story in fragments. He stopped mid-song. Priscilla walked in with another man. The king froze, but then he sang like never before. Each retelling added its own weight, its own shade of emotion. Bootleg tapes captured more than just music. On those scratchy cassettes, you can hear the gasps, the uneasy silence, and the thunderous ovation that followed. Copies were passed hand to hand, tucked inside envelopes, traded in record shops as if they were contraband. For those who listened, the hiss of the tape became proof that the story was true. Local papers hinted at drama. The Las Vegas Review-Journal ran a small column the next morning. Elvis stops mid-song at Hilton, crowd stunned by silent pause. The headline didn't tell the whole story, but it was enough to fuel imagination. For fans, it wasn't just gossip, it was revelation. They had seen their idol stripped of armor, and it made him more human, more reachable. They clung to that memory, carrying it like a secret treasure. Years later, fan clubs still spoke of it. At gatherings in Memphis and Tupelo, someone would always ask, "Were you there the night Elvis stopped for Priscilla?" Heads would nod, voices would overlap, and stories would tumble out. The night became legend, part of the living folklore that surrounded him. Artifacts surfaced too. A diary entry from a young fan named Maria described the silence in detail. "I thought the world had stopped," she wrote. "He looked right through us, then gave us back a piece of his heart." Her words were passed around as if they were scripture. In the Hilton itself, whispers lingered long after. Waiters and stagehands told new hires, "This is the room where the king froze." A backstage plaque eventually marked the venue's history, though it mentioned only the date, August 1972. Those who knew the story understood the meaning. Priscilla never spoke openly about that night, at least not in public record, but fans speculated endlessly. Did she regret entering with another man? Did she realize the wound it caused? Mike Stone's name became part of the tale, whispered with blame, though no one truly knew his part beyond presence. The legacy wasn't only about scandal, it was about survival. Elvis had faced heartbreak in front of thousands and transformed it into art. That courage became part of his myth. By the late 1970s, When his health declined and performances grew uneven, fans often looked back to that Hilton show as proof of his strength. Even when he was broken, he gave everything, they'd say. Bootlegs of the performance grew rarer, but more prized. Collectors treated them like relics. The hiss of those tapes, the faint coughs and murmurs in the background, carried more authenticity than polished studio albums. They were windows into the man behind the legend. Why do moments of imperfection stay with us longer than polished perfection? Why do we remember the cracks more than the flawless notes? Because in those cracks, people saw themselves. The Hilton night became a mirror. Fans saw their own heartbreaks, their own moments of silence, their own decisions to keep going despite pain. Elvis had shown them that even a king could falter and still rise. By the time decades passed, the story was inseparable from his legacy. Fans gathering at Graceland during vigils would whisper about it, candles flickering in the dark. It had become more than a concert memory. It was folklore, and folklore never dies. The Hilton performance had entered history not through official recordings or grand press releases, but through the living memory of people who had been there. It was passed on like a secret inheritance, a legend that grew stronger with every retelling. But the story carried one final lesson, one final echo that outlived the music itself. August 1972. The Hilton showroom became more than a venue. It became a place where time itself seemed to hold its breath. For those who were there, the memory of that night would never fade. When Priscilla walked in with another man, the arena froze. 20,000 people stopped cheering. The music stumbled, and Elvis Presley, the king, the untouchable idol, showed the world that he was human. That night was not about gossip, nor scandal. It was about choice. In the space between anger and grace, Elvis chose grace. He chose to keep singing even when his heart was breaking. The freeze on stage became a mirror for everyone watching. It reminded them that no crown, no fame, no glittering jumpsuit could protect a man from pain. And yet, it also showed that pain could be turned into something greater. Elvis had transformed heartbreak into song. He had taken silence and filled it with compassion. He had turned humiliation into a moment of unity with his audience. That transformation was what lingered long after the night ended. In the years that followed, fans remembered not the perfect high notes or the dazzling moves, but the quiet pause, the whispered words, and the fragile smile. They remembered the night when Elvis lowered the mask, and they loved him more for it. That is the paradox of legends. It is not perfection that makes them eternal. It is the flaws, the cracks, the moments when they let us see the truth. Would you have had the courage to continue with the whole world watching? Would you have chosen compassion over pride? Elvis did, and because of that, the Hilton night lives on. Long after the lights dimmed and the applause faded, the echo of that silence remained, a silence more powerful than any guitar riff, any chorus, any encore. It was the silence of a man choosing to endure. And in that silence, the king was never more alive. If this story moved you, share it with someone who still believes legends never break. Were you or someone you know there at the Hilton that night? Tell us in the comments. Your memory might keep the flame alive. And if you want more untold stories like this, don't miss the next one waiting for you.